Welcome back. The listener asked about the imperial exams in Tang, Ming, and Qing dynasty China.
Ah, fascinating topic.
Yeah, they wanted to know specifically how they tested knowledge.
Oh, right, right.
And, buckle up because we found out that knowing everything wasn't the key to passing these exams.
Really makes you think, doesn't it? You'd think to become like a top official, you'd need to be...
A walking encyclopedia,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, a walking encyclopedia.
Yeah.
But as we dig into these excerpts from A.L. Bundy, we're going to see how the exams evolved and what skills actually mattered.
So maybe not what you'd expect.
Not what you'd expect, no.
Okay, so let's start way back in the Tang dynasty.
Okay.
Well, we always hear about how important poetry was back then.
Yeah.
So were these exams all about, like, finding the next Li Bai?
Well, not quite. So
Okay.
the Tang Dynasty Jinshi exams, and that's the highest level for aspiring officials, had three parts. You had scripture quotations, miscellaneous writings, and policy essays. So it wasn't just about poetic talent.
So it sounds like a mix of memorization and writing and politics. Is that
You got it.
okay?
Yeah, think of it as testing a well-rounded individual.
Okay, well-rounded, yeah.
So for the scripture quotations, it was all about showing you'd studied the Confucian classics.
Right.
Basically,
Proving
yeah.
you did your homework.
Yeah, proving you'd done your homework, exactly.
But wouldn't that, like, memorizing all those classics still require a ton of knowledge?
Yeah.
Like, how does that fit with what I've heard about the exams not needing, like, this vast knowledge?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It gets to the heart of how the system changed over time. So in the Tang Dynasty, the five classics, or the Wujing, were central.
Okay.
And we're talking about a massive collection of texts here, like almost 600,000 character,
Whoa.
with super dense language. Like even scholars today struggle with some of it.
Oh, wow.
Like how hard it is to teach just the Book of Songs because of all the rare characters in it.
Yeah, I can imagine. So those Tang Dynasty scholars must have had incredible memories.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that all changed later on, right?
Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting.
Okay, I like interest.
Yeah, so during the Ming and Qing dynasties, the exams shifted focus to the four books, the Sishu.
Okay.
Now, instead of that giant library of the five classics, you have a more manageable collection, a little over 50,000 characters.
Okay, a little more doable.
Plus, Zhu Xi, who compiled them, had a much clearer writing style.
Right.
So it's
Kind of like switching from reading an entire encyclopedia set to, like, the Cliff's Notes version.
a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
But why simplify things like that? Wouldn't that lower the bar for, becoming a government official?
Okay, now that is a good question.
The answer lies in social mobility. Sticking with the five classics would have favored wealthy families who could afford years of tutoring and access to these rare texts.
Right, right.
Creating a kind of entrenched elite.
Yeah, like a...
An elite.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the Ming and Qing emperors, they wanted to avoid that. They needed talented officials from all backgrounds.
I see.
So by emphasizing the four books, kind of leveled the playing field.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
It's like they recognized that just demanding this pure breadth of knowledge could actually create more inequality. But if they weren't being tested on all those classics, like, how much did these candidates actually know?
Right.
Beyond those four books.
Well, that's where things get a bit amusing.
Okay.
Our sources suggest that most candidates focused heavily on those four books and exam-seeking techniques,
Okay.
not on actually gaining a deep understanding of, all of Chinese literature and history.
So they were basically like gaming the system.
You could say that the scholars, or Rulin Weishi in Chinese, tells this great story about a Jurin.
Okay.
Now that's someone who passed the provincial level exams, and he had never even heard of sushi.
Hang on, Sushi, remind me?
Yeah.
Who was that again?
So Sushi was one of the most famous poets and writers of the Song Dynasty.
Okay.
Renowned for his beautiful calligraphy and prose.
Got it.
A major figure in Chinese literature.
So for a scholar,
Yeah.
especially one who wants to be like a high official, to have never even heard of him, that's pretty crazy.
It is.
Yeah, that would be like an English lit grad never having heard of Shakespeare.
Exactly.
Okay, so they weren't exactly well-rounded intellectuals.
Right.
But surely the policy essays, where they had to write and show off their political views,
Yeah.
would have exposed their lack of knowledge, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But here's the irony. Those essays were often full of empty rhetoric and like really safe answers.
Really?
Yeah, candidates were terrified of offending the examiner, so they played it super safe.
So not exactly a breeding ground for like bold new political thinking then.
Not really, no.
But to really understand why this happened, we need to like delve into the heart of the system.
Yeah.
The dreaded eight-legged essay.
Oh yes, the eight-legged essay.
Right.
This is where the obsession with form over substance truly took hold.
Okay, lead the way.
All right.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so think of it as this very specific argument structure where each section or leg has to follow strict rules.
Okay.
So you start by breaking the topic, then you continue the topic, you write an introduction and a transition.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have four antithetical sections.
Well, four.
Four, where you present your point and counterpoint, and then finally a conclusion.
Okay, 8 parts. That's a lot to keep track of.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
And each part had its own like specific requirements and nuances.
Oh, I bet.
To excel, you needed more than just like memorized knowledge from the four books.
Right.
You had to be a master of wordplay and expression.
Okay.
Like wielding the Chinese language in these very specific ways.
So it wasn't enough to know what Confucius said. You had to know how to say it in the most impressive way possible.
Exactly. Like, for example, you couldn't just write Ziyu, that's Confucius said directly.
Oh,
You
right.
had to use these indirect, clever phrases, almost like a riddle.
So it was like a performance then, a display of linguistic skill.
Yeah.
This sounds ridiculously ridiculously hard.
It was.
Were there any other, like, tricks of the trade, I guess?
Oh, plenty. The antithetical couples, for example, required this deep understanding of rhyme and tone.
Oh, wow.
Something that children started learning from a young age.
Really?
Yeah, using texts like a primer on rhyme and meter or Xing Wu Kemeng in Chinese.
So they were, like, being groomed for the eight-legged essay from childhood.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow. I'm starting to see how the system might have actually stifled original thought.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, was there any room for creativity in this really rigid format?
You know, that's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
You actually had to, like, write like a playwright, almost embodying the voice of the sage.
Okay.
As if you were writing a scene for a play. Tang Xianzu, who was the playwright behind the Peony Pavilion, or Mudun Ting in Chinese.
Okay.
As someone who was skilled in both playwriting and the eight-legged essay.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So maybe it wasn't all dry academic stuff after all?
Right.
But let's be real, not everyone is a literary genius like Tang Xianzu.
True, true.
So, like, how did ordinary students even manage to master this crazy writing style?
That's where a new class of educators emerged.
Okay.
The teaching masters.
Okay.
And these weren't your typical scholars.
Right.
They were experts in exam-taking skills, not deep knowledge.
Interesting. Like specialized eight-legged essay coaches.
Exactly.
That sounds almost like something out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we have some pretty wild stories about them. Like Liang Qichao tells this one about a candidate who actually confused Martin Luther with a Chinese scholar named Lu Dai.
Wait, what?
Yeah, because of a misinterpretation of names.
He thought the Martin Luther Reformation and all was hanging out in ancient China.
Yep.
Wow. Goes to show how this hyper-focus on the exams could lead to some pretty big knowledge gaps.
It really does.
But speaking of Liu Bei, he wasn't just some random scholar with a similar name, right?
No.
He was, like, famous or something?
He was known as the exam god.
The exam guy?
Yeah, he helped students pass the Jinshi exams for over 30 years.
Wow, this guy sounds like a legend.
He was.
But didn't all this emphasis on, exam skills over real knowledge ultimately hurt China in the long run?
That's the question that takes us to the heart of this whole deep dive.
Okay.
Was the imperial examination system ultimately a success or a failure?
Ooh, a success or a failure?
To answer that, we need to look closer at the consequences of this unique system, particularly that obsession with the eight-legged essay.
Did all that focus on exam skills instead of, actual knowledge end up holding China back?
It's a question that has fascinated historians for like ages.
Yeah.
On the surface, the eight-legged essay just seems like some strange writing exercise, right?
Yeah, there's a quirky way to test how well someone could handle these, like, scholarly concepts.
Right. But in reality, this hyper-focus on form over substance had ripple effects throughout Chinese society. It wasn't just about, student cramming for exams.
Right.
It shaped how people thought,
Yeah.
how they approached problems.
So how did a writing style end up having such a, big impact?
Well, imagine spending years and years mastering this one very specific form of writing.
Yeah.
It fosters this whole culture of conformity,
Right.
where originality and critical thinking are actually discouraged.
Because rocking the boat doesn't get you a passing grade.
Yeah, exactly.
It all makes sense now.
Yeah.
Those policy FAs, the ones that are supposed to, show off their political brilliance.
Yeah.
They were also impacted by this, weren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember, we talked about them being full of empty rhetoric and safe answers.
Right.
It wasn't just fear of the examiners. Because it was the eight-legged essay mindset
Okay.
bleeding into like every aspect of their scholarship.
Oh, interesting.
They were so used to following the formula, pleasing the examiners,
Yeah.
that they shied away from truly original or challenging ideas.
So are we saying, like, a whole generation of potential reformers and innovators were basically stifled by a writing style?
It's a question that historians still debate.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does.
Especially when you think about China facing these huge challenges like
Right.
the Opium Wars, Western imperialism.
Right.
Could this, rigid inward-looking system have made it hard for them to like adapt and respond effectively?
Because they were so stuck in that eight-legged essay box, they couldn't think outside of it.
Exactly.
It's an interesting thought.
There were, of course, brilliant minds who pushed for reforms,
Right.
but they often faced pushback
Yeah.
from those who were clinging to the old ways of thinking.
Like that saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
Right. Perfect analogy. Conformity was rewarded,
Mm-hmm.
and those who questioned the status quo were often sidelined.
So this system that was meant to find the best and brightest
Yeah.
might have actually held China back in some ways.
It's complex.
Yeah.
Historians continue to debate the exam system's legacy,
Mm-hmm.
but it's clear that the eight-legged essay and the culture it created had far-reaching consequences.
It really makes you wonder, what might have been different
Yeah,
if things had gone another way?
it does. And it
Yeah.
reminds us that even systems created with the best intentions can have unintended
Right.
and sometimes negative consequences.
So what happened next? Did anyone try to change the system?
There were attempts at reform,
Okay.
but they often faced resistance.
Yeah.
And they didn't always address the root of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine trying to fix a leaky boat while you're still out on stormy seas.
And those storms were brewing,
Yeah.
both inside and outside of China, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Internal pressures like a growing population, economic inequality, social unrest,
Right.
all happening at the same time that they were facing threats from Western powers.
Right.
It's almost like the exam system became this symbol of a much larger crisis.
A clash between holding on to the past and needing to embrace change.
Exactly.
But what about those who did manage to make it through this system
Yeah.
and become officials.
Right.
Were they all just blindly following the rules?
That takes us to a really fascinating part of this story.
Okay.
Personal agency.
Okay.
Even within these rigid structures, individuals could and did make choices that shaped their paths.
So it wasn't all doom and gloom?
Not at all.
There were actually officials who tried to make things better.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Some used their positions to push for reforms, to
Okay.
address injustices, and make a real difference in people's lives.
That's great.
They used the knowledge and skills they'd honed,
Yeah.
even within this, flawed system, to
Yeah.
serve their communities
Uh-huh.
and try to improve things from within.
It's almost like they were playing this like delicate game,
Yeah,
working within the rules while also trying to change.
precisely.
Yeah.
Their stories remind us that even in the most rigid systems, individuals can make a difference through their choices and actions.
It's inspiring
Yeah,
and also a little bit hopeful.
it is.
Even when things seem, set in stone,
Yeah,
there's always that possibility for change.
I agree.
So looking back at all of this, what stands out to you as like the biggest takeaway from the Imperial examinations?
I think for me, it's that balance
Okay.
between tradition and innovation.
Okay.
We can respect the wisdom of the past,
Yeah.
but we also have to be willing to adapt and evolve
Right.
to meet the challenges of the present and the future.
I like that. And for me, it's that power of individual agency.
Yeah.
Even within these seemingly rigid systems, we may not always be able to change the whole game, but we can still make choices
Yeah.
that, align with our values
Right.
and make a positive impact.
Exactly. We can all be reformers in our own way.
Right.
And we need to be mindful of
Right.
those unintended consequences. System, like the Imperial exams, can have ripple effects far beyond their original purpose.
It's a reminder to think critically,
Yeah.
question assumptions,
Mhm.
be open to different perspectives.
Absolutely.
It's
right.
definitely more complicated than just memorizing a bunch of Confucian classics, right?
Oh, that's for sure.
Now, the real question is, how does all of this connect to China today?
Right.
Like, what echoes of this, 1,000-year-old system can we still see in the 21st century?
Now, that is a question I can't wait to
Dive. We've been on quite a journey through China's imperial examination system.
It is remarkable, isn't it, to see how a system that lasted for over 1,000 years really left its mark.
Yeah, from Tang Dynasty poetry to
Right.
those infamous eight-legged essays, we've really seen how this system, shaped minds and
Yeah.
influenced China's history.
hmm
But now for the big question.
Yeah.
What lasting legacy did it leave? Can we still see its echoes in China today?
You can't just erase something that was so ingrained in a society
Right.
for centuries,
Yeah.
But it's not always easy to spot those connections.
Right.
It's like trying to trace the roots of an ancient tree
Yeah.
back to its origins.
So where do we even begin to unearth this legacy?
Well, I think a natural place to start is education.
Okay.
The whole idea of standardized testing,
Right.
of using exams for advancement based on merit that has deep roots in this imperial exam tradition.
Are you saying those grueling Gallicao exams that Chinese students take today
Yeah.
are like a modern day version of the imperial exam?
There are definitely parallels.
Okay.
The intense pressure to excel.
Yeah.
The competition for those limited spots, the emphasis on memorization.
Right.
It all kind of evokes the past.
So it's more than just a testing format, right?
Right.
It's about how this whole system shaped values
Yeah.
and social structure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That reverence for education, the pursuit of scholarly achievement,
Yeah.
this belief that hard work and merit can elevate your social status.
Right.
I mean, these are all deeply embedded
Yeah.
in Chinese culture.
Like a cultural DNA passed down through generations.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And like any DNA,
Yeah.
it's got its strengths
Yeah.
and its weaknesses.
Okay, so let's break that down.
Okay.
What are some of the positive aspects
All right.
of this legacy?
Well, on the plus side, you could argue that it helped foster a culture of meritocracy.
Okay.
At least, in theory,
Right.
it promoted this idea that anyone, regardless of background, could rise through the ranks based on their abilities.
Which is pretty revolutionary when you think about it,
Yeah.
considering how many societies back then were just based on hereditary privilege.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it instilled this deep respect for learning and scholarship,
Right.
which has undoubtedly contributed to China's incredible intellectual and cultural achievements
Mhm.
throughout history.
It's hard to deny the sheer amount of knowledge and innovation that came out of China,
Right.
even with this system's flaws.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that drive to succeed,
Mhm.
that willingness to push yourself to the limit.
Right.
It's something you can still see in so many aspects of Chinese society today.
But we can't ignore the downsides either.
Of course
We
not.
talked about how this focus on exams might have, stifled creativity,
Yeah.
critical thinking,
Right.
and favored conformity.
Exactly. And there's also that risk of a system that prioritizes test-taking skills over practical knowledge
Right.
and real-world problem solving.
Yeah, it's like that saying, they can ace a test, but can they build a bridge?
Exactly. And let's not forget the intense pressure these exams create,
Oh, yeah.
leading to stress, anxiety,
Right.
even despair for those who don't succeed.
It's a heavy burden to carry.
It is.
Yeah, it also makes me think about inequality.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the system was meant to be meritocratic, did it really level the playing field?
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Access to, quality education and the resources needed to excel in those high-stakes exams is still not evenly distributed.
So even with the best of intentions,
Right.
the system could still end up favoring those from more privileged backgrounds?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
And that can create like a cycle of disadvantage where
Right.
those who start behind are likely to stay behind.
Yeah.
It shows how even well-intentioned systems can have flaws
Right.
and sometimes perpetuate the very inequalities they were designed to address.
It's a sobering reminder
Yeah,
that no system is perfect and there's always work to be done.
true.
So how does this all relate to China today?
Well,
As they grapple with these questions of, education,
Yeah.
meritocracy, social mobility,
right.
how does the legacy of these imperial exams play into that conversation?
It gives us this historical context, a new lens for understanding these modern-day challenges. Like, knowing the roots of that ancient tree helps us understand how it grows
Right.
and how it might need to be, pruned or shaped for a better future.
It also shows that these aren't new issues, right?
No, not at all.
Like they've been debated for centuries.
Centuries, yeah.
So what can we learn from all of this?
Mhm.
I know our listeners probably wondering, what it all means for the future of education,
Yeah.
not just in China, but globally.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers.
Right.
But it is a question worth asking
Mm-hmm.
as we examine our own education systems. How
Yeah.
do we create a world where opportunity is truly based on merit,
Yeah.
where individual talents can flourish,
Right.
where we learn not just to pass a test, but to actually thrive
Yeah.
in this complex world?
That is a great question, and one that I think we all need to keep thinking about.
I agree.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into history, culture, and the enduring legacy of the imperial examinations.
My pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring this fascinating topic with us.